Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everybody for braving the weather and coming out this morning, or actually this afternoon. Today's panel discussion is going to be on academic freedom and student rights. And feel free to come on in and grab a seat. You're not late. And I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers in the order that they will be presenting. Pretty much the format of this today is going to be each one of them will have about 5 minutes to speak on the topic. And then we will open it up to the floor to ask any questions or any comments or suggestions or just discussion. To my immediate left is Steve Richardson, who is the professor of geology and atmospheric sciences and head of the Center for Teaching Excellence. Our second presenter will be will be Dell Ross, chair of the English department. Our third speaker will be Frank Moore, who is the assistant professor of English and a member of the African American Studies program here on campus. And finally, our last speaker will be Jacqueline Mitchell, who is the assistant professor of education administration and coordinator of education placement. And at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Steve.
Thanks, man. Can anybody, just off the top of your head, remember what the motto for the state of Iowa is? This is one of these things you don't usually carry around on the top of your head, but does anybody by any chance happen to know? Ann Dolan's perhaps the only one who even has a shot at it, unless we have a political scientist. Yeah, I wouldn't happen to know normally either. No, it's not the place to grow, although that would have been a better motto perhaps. That's a good motto for an institution, but not the state of Iowa. I won't keep you in suspense anymore. I happened to look at the Iowa state flag the other day. I wasn't doing anything else. And here it is right across the flag. It says, "Our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain." That's the motto for the state of Iowa, which I thought was sort of apropos. Because it says something about what the university is about and how it fits into the context of a state like this one. And there we sit. I'm not really a motto person normally, but I thought that was a nice observation to start with anyway. In thinking about academic freedom and students' rights, I think it's fashionable in one sense to think of this as a divisive sort of topic, as if academic freedom was the faculty side of the discussion, and student rights was the other side of the discussion, and we're trying to figure out why one side feels a tension with the other side. But in fact, as I think about it, and as I thought about it over the last couple of weeks, and thinking of how to start things here, seems to me that academic freedom is as much a student concern as it is a faculty concern, and student rights are as much a faculty concern as they are a student concern. We're all bound up in that, our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain sort of thing. Academic freedom for the faculty member means a freedom to structure things in a way that seems pedagogically best, way to get things across in the classroom, to engage students in discussion, and the freedom to present things that seem to advance whatever the issue or the topic of the day is, or whatever the topic of the course is, without the feeling that somebody is going to come along and tell you how to do it better. Academic freedom for the faculty member, I think, is sort of recognition that faculty members are hired to be experts in their fields. They're hired to be the ones who know what's going on and ought to have a fairly great say in how it's put across, because who else has those credentials? From the student perspective, academic freedom is the freedom to learn. It's the freedom to come to a university like this and to pick from the smorgasbord of ideas that are out there, from the different people that are out there to learn from, and not feel that anybody's going to tell you beyond some very basic requirements for graduation that you have to do this, you have to do that, and you have to do it in this way. It's the academic freedom works for all of us, whether we're on the expert side or whether we're on the becoming expert side. The student rights part of it is equally balanced in my own mind. Clearly, when you talk about student rights, that puts the initial focus on the student and what the student has the right to expect in the class. The student has a right to expect the highest quality education the university can possibly offer, and that the faculty as individuals or collectively can possibly offer. Anything less isn't living up to the promise that we make when we take your money and admit you to the university. It is an expectation that you'll be treated with respect, that you will be treated in a fair and just fashion, that your work will be respected. There are all sorts of things that go into the student rights side of it. From the faculty point of view, this helps to define what our role in a university is. It helps to set the standard against which we teach. It helps us to know why we're here. We are here because the students are here. And if we were not teaching to students, who would we be teaching to? We work to the student rights side of the equation in helping to define who we are as faculty. And you have to remember, at one time or another, we too were students. We went through the student rights side of it, and that's helped to shape who we are as faculty members. And just because we happen to attain faculty rank doesn't mean we stop being students. So for me at least, the topic of the day, the academic freedom and student rights thing, is not a divisive sort of issue which puts faculty here and students over there and has them lobbing missiles back and forth across an imagined boundary between them, but is in fact a common ground that we sit on as a university, a place that we begin and try to recognize where all of our freedoms and rights derive and where we can go with them. And with that, I'm not sure whether that was 5 minutes, Tony, but at least that at least sets a tone for my own perspective on things, and I pass it to Dr. Ross.
You want me or Tony next? Sure. Okay. I want to talk in the few minutes I have about the notion of a compact. It seems to me that what exists in the larger society and what exists inside the academy is best illustrated by the notion of a compact. That is, that faculty and students are, in a sense, a society within the walls of this institution who have made a compact with one another. That compact includes certain assumptions about the way in which each group will perform, about the way in which faculty will perform with respect to students. That students are, after all, the raison d'etre of most faculty's existence. We are here because the students are here. We therefore owe them a respect and allegiance which we in turn expect them to owe us. Now, by allegiance I do not mean blind faith in them, or that we expect blind faith from them in us. But I assume at the outset of any class that I teach that the students are there and that they have come there in search of something. Allegedly, the something they are searching for is what the topic of the course is. They expect me to treat them with dignity and to tell them, insofar as it's possible for me to do so, what it is that the subject that I am professing is all about. I assume that they are unlettered in the way that I am not. That does not mean, on the other hand, that I assume that they are ignorant. I assume simply that they have yet to be introduced to, in any particular depth, the subject matter. And part of my role as a faculty member is to encourage them to examine their lives. I guess it was Socrates or Aristotle, somebody who said the unexamined life is not worth living. Part of what we do in the humanities, certainly, is to encourage the examination and re-examination of systems of value and systems of belief. Literature is full of such examinations and re-examinations. And to some extent, the role of the faculty member, it seems to me, is often to at least create a climate in which there may be little revolutions taking place in the minds of students. That may or may not happen, but that the atmosphere within the classroom ought to be one in which the students are encouraged to examine their beliefs, to examine the beliefs of their society, and to speak up when they find those beliefs to be wanting. Now, that compact is one, I think, that is a delicate one, and the preservation of it means what's in the balance is the existence of institutions like this. Without it, and without the civility that normally accompanies such a compact, we cannot long prevail. An institution is not a prison, nor is a classroom a jail cell. Students are free to enroll in classes that they think are interesting. They are also free to drop classes they are no longer interested in. Inside that classroom, then, there ought to be an atmosphere in which ideas are exchanged, respect is generated from both ends, and the faculty member's role is to try to encourage the student to examine his or her belief systems, his or her society, through whatever medium the course happens to deal with. If it's literature, as Frank and I, for example, are involved in, then it's literature. If it's history, then it's history. If it's philosophy, then it's philosophy. If it's art, then it's art. But the point of my remarks, at least at the outset, is that without that kind of compact that we enter into without ever signing a document or ever saying a word about its existence, without that, the whole business of what passes for education in any society is doomed. The society, at the same time, has to respect that compact and has to do everything in its power to make certain that the compact can exist through the governmental agencies, through economic means, through social and political means. Insofar as we are involved in a sort of journey together, relatively short journey at that, 4 years in most cases, insofar as we are involved in a journey together, we depend upon one another for the successful completion of that journey.
I will begin by telling a story. I will not probably take 5 minutes for my remarks because Professor Ross and the professor have said much of what I wanted to say. I started teaching many years ago in a small college in Mississippi, Rusk College. And I wanted to present during the fall semester of 1967, I believe it was 67, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf by Edward Albee. We had our rehearsals, we had trials of the play, we had posted the times of rehearsals and so on. And the president came up to me and he said in the hall one day that we will not produce the play, Mr. Murrah. And I said, why? He said, because the language and we're not ready for it. And I said, but you are impinging on my freedom. He said, I'll take the impinge and you can take your freedom and leave. All right. And discussion is closed. There will be no Virginia Woolf. There was no Virginia Woolf. I didn't say any more about it. Certainly we have moved a long way from 1967. And our concern now, however, is as a faculty person and as a student at one time, where do you draw the line between the student's right to raise questions about your method of teaching, even to raise questions about the text that you have selected for the class, and the student's right to participate fully and be engaged in his or her education as you move into a classroom situation. Certainly, we like to believe in this country that we do, as faculty persons, have the right to choose our text and the methodology and the way we grade and evaluate our students. And yet, as Professor Ross mentioned, we would not be here if we didn't have students. That does not mean, however, that we are subservient, that we are buffoons in the classroom, but it seems to me that since we are in the process of training, helping students to grow, that we must at all times be acutely aware of the fact that the student is there before us, the student is a human being, and the student has feeling, and therefore we should not necessarily, I'm saying necessarily now, impose in a high-handed way on the student. We owe it to the student then, when he enters our classroom, to give him a contract in the form of a fairly detailed outline or syllabus, telling him or her what is required in terms of reading, telling him or her what is required in terms of participation, etc., and how you are going to share and give out the knowledge, and so on. Nothing then is to be hidden. There shouldn't be any hidden agendas. And in the process then of engaging in the creation of knowledge, questioning text in English and history, we engage text, we question text, and we encourage students to do the same thing. In the process of doing that, we do not privilege any answer as such. That is to say, we encourage the student to present his or her point of view, even though we have a different perspective and we may know more about the subject. We do not put the student down simply because that student's idea is not as fully developed as ours, ostensibly fully developed as ours. In addition, it seems to me that the teacher has the responsibility to set the tone for the class. And even though sometimes students can be totally unnerving, ornery, difficult, faculty can be the same way. It seems to me that the faculty member must at all times maintain his or her professional decorum in relationship to the student, because he is training, participating with, and mentoring that student as he, the faculty person, engaged in carrying out his responsibility. Another important function for the faculty is to help the student find his or her voice. It is so difficult if you come to school as a freshman or a sophomore to have the freedom and the courage to participate in discussion. The faculty, it seems to me, if the class is small enough, should help the student find his or her voice. He, the faculty, or she, the faculty member, has gone through the process already, and therefore he or she can share with the student. One other point that I want to make also. The faculty member, in terms of the student, sometimes students will ask questions about, why did you assign this crazy text? It doesn't say very much to me, and so on. At first, you may be somewhat angry with the student, but it seems to me that the student has a right to know, and as far as possible, tell him or her to read it, and then explain why, how the text fit into the course, your goals, etc. Finally, it seems to me then that in terms of academic freedom, the faculty will be free to explore topics, ideas, concepts with the student in the classroom. But the faculty must never, it seems to me, allow him or herself to become so disenchanted with the student that the classroom situation then becomes not a place for sounding of ideas, not a place where ideas are engaged, not a place where people find their voices, but where we have people contending in terms of who will win in the final analysis. It is not about someone winning in the final first analysis. It is about teaching, educating, helping students to be, and in the process of helping students to become faculty, the faculty person also grows, and the faculty person also becomes. I have not always done this.
Yes.
Thank you. Much of what I thought I wanted to say has been said and has been well said. Perhaps I should get up and leave. Oh, okay. Well, since you insist, I would like to be first to acknowledge that academic freedom, complex as it may be, affords me and other professors a great deal of protection from those who at any particular time might choose to try to dictate to me what I should teach and how I should teach. And for me, that's extremely important. However, though, it's important to note that behind the concept of academic freedom rests the basic fundamental assumption that the choices I make will always reflect a concern for fairness and equity, and it will also reflect a commitment to creating a learning environment that's designed to provide students with numerous opportunities to explore, to examine, and yes, even to generate new ideas. The problem, however, lies in the degree to which, the problem lies, however, in the extent to which the professor's philosophy about teaching and learning will allow this to occur. We frequently admonish our students to take control of their own learning, to assume responsibility for their own educational development. Unfortunately, though, we continue as educators, both K-12 and post-secondary, we continue to follow a traditional model of instruction that may have served us well at one point in time, but it is a model that supports a teacher-centered and a teacher-directed learning environment. Within such a classroom, the teacher is both the keeper of and dispenser of knowledge and ideas. And certainly after 13 or more years of this style of teaching, students are well trained for a culture that requires its citizens to follow guidelines, to comply with existing rules, and to accept the status quo. This kind of training worked quite well for the industrial age, but no longer do we live in an age where uniformity of thought and unyielding conformance to predetermined standards and rules are either desirable or productive. One look, one approach certainly is counterproductive of the requirements of this new age we live in, this age of high tech, where collaboration, cooperation, and critical thinking are necessary for the continuous improvement and growth of this American society. Today, our employers tell us that knowing still remains a very high priority, yet they criticize us for frequently failing to encourage our students to be risk takers. They say we don't inspire in them the need and the drive to use their own initiative. we fall short in preparing them to make the right kinds of decisions using a decision-making process that will allow them to collect information and arrive at a reasonable solution. In essence, they tell us we don't provide students with skills to be good problem solvers or critical thinkers. In our world today, we seek individuals who can successfully think from both a creative and innovative standpoint, while at the very same time using their skills to think analytically and logically. As you can see, the traditional approach to instruction lessens that possibility that our students will match these criteria for success. The traditional model encourages dependency, stifles creativity, and reduces the possibility of our creating new knowledge, dispelling old myths, or even examining our world from a variety of perspectives. Personally, from the very moment that I enter a classroom, I am fully aware of the academic freedom guaranteed me by the university and by the legal system. But uppermost, always in my mind, is the notion that it is my responsibility to create in that classroom an environment that will stimulate learning and an environment that will certainly provide our students those tools likely to empower them to sort through myriads of issues, concepts, and ideas with the expectations that eventually they will absorb all that is needed to make them productive citizens. And when I think productive citizens, I think of those who will use their knowledge and their skills to promote a morally sound and ethically just society for the 21st century. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the floor for any questions or comments. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I have a comment, especially about the comments of the first speaker, i.e. the adverse relationship between the faculty and students. In any relation, one thing that I think you didn't mention, but perhaps should be considered, that in any relationship, whether it's a relationship between two lovers, or a husband and wife, or a child parent, it's the most basic ingredient is the power struggle. And that power struggle exists and should exist probably, otherwise it's unavoidable. And there is a power struggle between the professor and the students. And it should be, because it's a relationship, and every relationship has ingredients of the financial structure, never i.e. power struggle. So one has to not to dismiss that point in explaining the adverse relationship. It is unavoidable, and whoever is more powerful, he will impose his or his ideas on the class. Even if your ideas are ideas of freedom, you will impose those ideas. And those students who are against that, they themselves will become the faculty members. Some of them will be more imposing their ideas, more pushing their authority and their power. And I think this should not be dismissed. It is an unavoidable fact. Whoever finally power wins, whether it's in ideology or in action or in anything else. And the student feels that, and it's unavoidable and should not be dismissed.
I'm afraid that particular model is not one I'm comfortable with. I don't see education as an adversarial process. I see education as a process in which both the teacher and the students are exploring knowledge. The faculty member comes to the process with the advantage of years of expertise, of having thought problems out, and has the responsibility to help the students come to a greater realization of the subject material. And of necessity, that will be an uncomfortable process. It should be. Students should be expected to have their ideas challenged, to have their minds stretched in many different ways. But that doesn't mean that it has to be adversarial to do that, that there has to be any sense of power struggle in it. It's simply a matter of the faculty member fulfilling her responsibility as a teacher to stretch the students' minds and to make them feel uncomfortable, but not in the process losing respect for the individual, not in any of the things that I personally read into the words power struggle.
I'd like to respond to that. I think he's right. It is a power struggle as long as we look at teaching and learning from the traditional model. And maybe I didn't make that clear in my little discussion, but we still function as we did in 1600s around the kitchen table where we said, I'm the boss and I know what's good for you. You sit there, you memorize it, you learn it, and you be cool. We don't live in that kind of an environment.
That's right, we
In
shouldn't.
the 25th century, there won't be a power struggle.
I
The new
s-
ideas is a power struggle. The new liberal ideas is also a power struggle. They impose on you.
I do not wish to suggest it'll go away. I'm just simply stating that as long as we remain on the traditional track,
Right now, you're trying to impose your ideas on me. Right now.
I don't care whether you buy my idea.
Okay, hold on, wait a second here.
Thank you.
I'm merely
You've got-
responding. I wanted to have an opportunity to respond just as he had an opportunity.
That's
to
what I'm getting
express
ready to do here. Let's not get this a power struggle, okay? I'd like to go ahead and let Jacqueline respond to your point, and then we'll go to another question because I know we've got a lot out there.
And I guess my position is that once we as educators, and this has to start happening in our teacher ed training programs, in our public schools, once we begin to acknowledge that the best way to promote the kinds of critical thinking in our students, the kinds of decision-making processes that they will need for us to survive as a country, until we start promoting that, we will continue to allow the power struggle to ruin us. And, at least we can modify it. If I walk into the classroom with the assumption that this is going to be a two-way thing, I don't know it all, and I'm going to learn from you, and I want you to think. Critique me, do whatever you choose, but do so. And I mean, if you tick me off, I may respond in a negative way. But I hope as a reasonable person and as a well-trained educator, I will have the sense to say, this is a learning experience, and whether they agree with me or disagree, doesn't matter. The point that I want to have, thing I want to have happen in my classroom, is that students think and think for themselves, whether I agree or disagree.
Okay, in the back.
Okay, there are a couple things here that I wanted to comment on and then add a question to the panel. I've heard that the purpose of education is for a professor to challenge students and for students to challenge themselves, and there's a contact there with students and the professor will have mutual respect for each other. I believe that part of that contact is the student being willing to challenge themselves as well. And where I'm coming from with this is the new Regents policy dictating that professors have to warn students about some possible subject material and give them an option to opt out. And by opting out, are the students violating that compact not only with the professor but with themselves by refusing to challenge their own attitudes and their own ideas? And with this policy, have we really come that far since 1967?
Well, the imposition of policies by external forces has an ugly history in this country when it comes to academic institutions, as you probably are aware. There was a period in the late 1940s when the House Committee on Un-American Activities operated in such a way as to cause people like us at institutions like this to sign loyalty oaths in which we swore allegiance to the government of the United States and signed a list of names we couldn't, a long list of names that we didn't belong to any of these organizations. These are, unfortunately, political realities. And in that period, there were relatively few faculty members who were willing to stand up and say no. And those who did were dismissed from their institutions. Some of them were reinstated later on when some sense returned to the country. But when they did come back, they often were not able, or their colleagues were often not able to look them in the eye. The regents hold the purse strings indirectly through the legislature. And therefore, as Professor Mitchell and Professor Avian have noted, You have a question of contending forces, power. In my view, the compact is in fact violated when outside agencies seek to control the content of the classroom. And as Professor Moore was indicating, it is also violated when inside agencies, be they students or department chairs or colleagues, intend to control the content of your class. The assumption is that you are a professional. You are hired because you are a professional. What you do in your course, whatever your course is, we have to assume is what you do as a professional. And if we decide that for one reason or another this is subject matter you shouldn't teach, then it seems to me we violated that compact. So I agree that if students decide, for whatever the reason, that something which is going on in a classroom is offensive to them, that is, some idea which is being discussed, for example, and choose to opt out, obviously they have the right to do that, and they have the freedom to do that. But it does interfere, as Professor Moore said, with the notion that a faculty member chooses material for a reason. It's purposeful. It's not just willy-nilly, whim and caprice. And if you choose to absent yourself during a particular part of the course when material is offensive to you, you have, in my judgment, violated that compact. Yes.
Other questions? Yes.
How many professors take a class on how to teach? And I guess the second part of that question is could you go through your entire career, graduate, get a BS, an MS, a PhD in English, and never not once have gotten in front of a classroom and taught English, and then be expected to come out of the state and teach English?
Let me respond and protect my little department. We're in in education administration, and this is a trend across the country. In hiring people to become members of the faculty, they are almost requiring that each one of us has had some experience with classroom teaching at the K-12 level, and often if we're in ed, they want us to have had some administrative experiences. The position being that if I have taught in a public school, if I have been an administrator in a public school, that increases my credibility. However, I can say that throughout my career, I've encountered many faculty members who only learned how to teach by trial and error.
I think the reality that Mr. Bolden is recognizing is that, in fact, at the university level, most faculty have not been taught in any rigorous way how to teach. Most of us learn on the job, and I remember being a junior faculty member in the late 70s, teaching in ways that I would not consider teaching today, just because I really didn't know what I was doing. I would like to think, and this is Director of Center for Teaching Excellence speaking, I would like to think that that pattern is changing, that there is an enthusiasm among faculty, both newly hired faculty and faculty who've been at the universities across the country for quite some time, for learning how to be better at their jobs. And that's one of the reasons that the university now has a Center for Teaching Excellence, is to encourage faculty to explore new ways to teach, to relate to students, and to get the subject matter out there in ways other than standing up and just lecturing. It's going to be a long time coming, but I think the fact that we are trying at this university and all across the country in the universities is a good sign. So your concern is well placed, Michael, but and the answer is no. Most faculty are not trained to teach. We try awful hard, and we need a little bit of help every once in a while, but I think the universities are trying hard to provide that help.
At the University of Iowa, when I was there, in English and American Studies, there was a concerted effort to make sure that all these persons in the PhD program would teach 2 to 3, 4 years. And there were seminars during the semester. And each of us were assigned a mentor to visit our classes and to tell us about our teaching. Students were allowed to evaluate us twice per semester. One time, given to us directly, the last part of the semester sent to the department's office and so on. And we had to discuss and tabulate the evaluation from the students.
But in response to your question, the answer is yes, it would be possible for that to happen. It is far less likely that that would happen these days than it would have been 30 years ago, let's say. For some reasons which are essentially economic. Most graduate students, for example, in English, need support of some kind, and that support comes largely from teaching assistantships. And in most institutions now of the size of this one, the graduate assistants are fairly carefully trained through pro-seminars and through mentoring and monitoring processes involving faculty, so that there is the kind of training which I think you allude to. But in fact, it would be possible for someone, I suppose, to get all the way through a PhD in English without ever having taught for one moment in a classroom. But it's not likely to happen these days.
Okay, yes.
Okay, as has been said, it is possible for a professor to go through without teaching at all. But say a teacher has been teaching for however long, and that's not the issue. And you noted that there was a contract or compact between students and teachers. If it becomes evident that a professor breaks that contract and has done so continually, then why isn't it obvious that that professor should not be teaching what they are teaching? Because it was also said that a teacher should not put a student down. A teacher should not put a student down because that student's ideas aren't as developed as theirs. So if a teacher does that, then obviously they're going against that. The faculty must at all times maintain the professionalism. If they don't do that, there's a problem. Faculty should encourage the students to find their voices. If they're consistently denying students their right to make comments in the class, then they're not helping the students to find their voices. Faculty should make the classroom environment so that it's free to explore concepts and ideas with the student, but must not hinder the exchange or create an environment where it becomes I am right and you are wrong, or you are right and I am wrong, or something like that. And if that situation has been created by the professor, then the professor has obviously not been doing his or her job, and if this has been done consistently, then that professor should not be in that position.
Okay, so I'm going to have you
Ask the question.
ask your question.
The question mainly is, do you agree with that?
I'll try to have a crack at it first. One of the things that goes along with training people to teach in an institution like this is the notion that faculty members are accountable. They're accountable to their departments, they're accountable to their colleagues, they're accountable to the profession and to the university. And that accountability is in some ways measured through an ongoing series of performance evaluations. That is, all faculty are subject to performance evaluations. Now, they should be annual. There are formal ones, depending on whether a person is tenured or not, at particular intervals, 3 years or 5 years, whatever. But every faculty member within an academic unit is supposed to be evaluated annually. Do we do that effectively? By and large, no, we don't. Do we do the evaluations effectively at 3 and 5 years? Yes, we do those much more effectively than we do on an annual evaluation. If a faculty member's performance is short of the mark, the standards, the expectations of a department, that can be discovered in a variety of ways, but it's the responsibility of the academic unit with whom that faculty member is associated to carry out those kinds of evaluations. And if they're done properly, the sorts of things that you talked about should be brought to light. Then there are a couple of things that can happen. One of which depends on what the status of the faculty member is. If it's probationary, then in some way that might have an effect on whether that person's contract is renewed. If the person is tenured, there is every reason to believe that a faculty member who may suddenly start behaving in the classroom, and violating the compact, ought to be talked to and given an opportunity to understand what he or she is doing that he or she shouldn't be doing, and to make corrective action. If that doesn't happen, then obviously a unit is within its rights to begin some kind of dismissal proceedings.
Okay, can I follow up on that?
Before I let you follow up, I'm going to ask if anybody else on the panel wants to respond to this question.
I'd just like to say one thing if I could. And Kosi, I think you raised some very good questions. They are it's a very delicate balance to deal with here. When I was responding to Professor Abian, I suggested that one of the faculty's responsibilities in a classroom is to create some sense of tension, to make students feel uneasy about their lack of knowledge, to make them want to stretch farther. And that isn't likely to be a comfortable process. Sometimes, because we are people and we are sort of shooting in the dark and we're having to deal with lots of different personalities in a classroom, sometimes